This video is looking at An Unknown Girl by Monica Alvi, and this may well be a poem that you're studying either for coursework or for an exam, or you might be approaching it as practice for an unseen poem. So first of all, if you can make sure that you've got a clean copy of the poem in front of you and read it through. I'm not going to read it in this video, but it would help if you've got something to make notes on so you can annotate along with me and put your own ideas in as well. So take a moment just to read the first page of the poem and then the second page. Okay, so now if we look, I've started to put some annotation on here and we'll work through it and maybe add some as we're going through. And I'll add any annotation in blue so you can see where it appears. Now, first of all, reflecting on the title. And if this is a studied poem, you will have time to obviously kind of read it through, think about it, appreciate the themes and ideas, and then bring all of those concepts back into the title. So the idea of an unknown girl, we know from our reading of the poem that the speaker is talking about having one of those henna tattoos, those temporary tattoos, put on her hand in a bazaar, like a market in India. And it's being done by a girl whose name she doesn't know, who's completely unknown to her. She doesn't know what this girl's thinking. She doesn't know anything about her life, apart from their worlds are meeting at that moment. And there's this kind of strangely intimate experience where, you know, she's having her hand held, she's having her hand steadied against the girl's leg. But who is the unknown girl? I think first of all, obviously, there's the idea that it's the girl who's doing the henna tattoo. But also, secondly, it could be the speaker, because this is as much a kind of poem exploring somebody's relationship with a different culture, or maybe their relationship with a culture that also belongs to them, bearing in mind Alvi's background. And the idea that this is exploring kind of the juxtaposition, the meeting, the mixing up of different ideas and influences. And at this moment, the speaker is taking this opportunity to kind of think, what does this mean to her? What does the culture in which she's immersed herself at this moment, what impact is that going to have on her? So she's finding out things about herself as she's going through this reflection. So we start with, in the evening bazaar studded with neon, an unknown girl is hennaing my hand. And setting-wise, we've got a marketplace, kind of this social area, busy, energetic, and decorated. You know, the kind of lights are there, the brightness of them, the hope that all metaphorically brings. This is something which is very active, and it's decorated itself. You know, this is a place of, I guess, a very visual place. And neon is that kind of bright fluorescent electric light, so it's eye-catching. If you've done the poem The Bright Lights of Sarajevo, you've probably done some work on the title there in terms of bright lights, and idiomatically kind of that saying, the bright lights of a city are the promise of hope, etc. So we have this unknown girl is hennaing my hand, and we've got the present tense. So she is living in this moment. You know, we are sharing this moment with her. And that brings us to the kind of a little bit of the form and structure that we notice in the first four lines, because a lot of this poem is enjambed. There's a lot of enjambment, kind of building up that sense of the conversational tone, kind of intimate reflection, somebody thinking, a thought process. It's free verse, so there isn't an established metre, there isn't an established rhyme scheme. And again, that adds to the tone of kind of intimacy, reflection, conversation. And as we go through the poem, we get this idea of the speaker maybe really trying to fix this moment in the present into her mind for the future. Because as we move through, we notice we change tense at the end of the poem to be thinking about what is going to happen to her after this moment. So, you know, there's that idea of the repetition is trying to lock this moment into her memory. Also say there's a kind of ambiguity here, that it's ambiguous until the next line. This unknown girl on this third line is, and I think I'm just looking down here. I think in your copies these are probably small letters, so don't worry if there's a little bit of a discrepancy there. I thought I'd gone and caught them all, and clearly I have not. Okay, this is the idea of who is the unknown girl is slightly ambiguous until you get this present tense is hennering my hand. And I'd also pick up on the kind of aspirant H sounds, that kind of ha sound behind it. You can talk about the alliteration of the H sound if you can't remember the word aspirant. But that idea of anticipation, that quiet nervousness, waiting, to see what's happening in this experience, because we're talking about the design emerging, the kind of peacock starting to be kind of coming to life on her hand later on. And the girl squeezes a wet brown line from a nozzle. You've got the kind of onomatopoeia there as you're watching that kind of henna come out of the tube. And the idea of icing and nozzle leads into, again, this idea of things being decorative, things being bright and decorated and full of life. But the speaker is passive, okay? The speaker is the one being decorated. She's, if this is icing, she is the cake. The girl is completing her skill whilst the speaker stays still. And the girl, the henna artist, has a quiet confidence there and a beauty and a kind of sensuality almost, the satin peach that appeals to both kind of the visual image, possibly connects with the icing. This is a kind of lovely, sweet, beautiful, attractive kind of scenario, and the satin, shiny, luxurious. It's a real vivid. It's a really vivid memory or a beautiful experience. And as the speaker is kind of taking all of this in and is sitting there by herself, kind of being hennaed, then it might emphasize her kind of slight detachment from the culture she's observing. And for your interpretation, think, are you going to interpret this as the speaker has got some cultural or heritage connections to India and is identifying with the experience she's having as part of those roots, as part of her background? Or are you going to read it as the speaker is a tourist who is looking around and having this experience on holiday in India, and this is meaning kind of something to her? Or can you, and this is how I'd advise you to kind of explore it in an essay, can you have both ideas in your head and explore the poem through both of those lenses, using phrases like this could mean, it could also suggest? So, you don't have to go either or, but be aware of both of those interpretations. So we then have that end stop, kind of almost mimicking the steadiness. The girl is keeping her still, is keeping her held while she's completing this intricate design. And we have the repetition in the evening bazaar. And then for a few rupees, an unknown girl is hennaing my hand. So we've talked about the repetition could be implying that she's trying to fix this into her memory. But also the reference to rupees, first of all, confirms to us that this is India, because that's the national currency. But also the kind of for a few rupees. This is highlighting the difference or the discrepancy between the person who is being decorated and the person doing the decorating. The speaker's casual kind of observation that she's doing this for a few rupees. It's only costing a few rupees. Creates a tension between the fact that this is what the girl does, this is how she earns money, and there is a gap between their economic status. Then we move on to, as a little air catches my shadow stitch camise, a peacock spreads its lines across my palm. And the reason I've put this floaty little arrow in there is just to highlight the enjambment, because the idea of catches just being at the end of that line, just on the end of that line break, kind of catches it until it throws you through to the sibilance of the shadow-stitched camise. And I'd pick up that Z as well. And that's a kind of traditional tunic. So our speaker is wearing kind of more traditional dress in this market. And as the air catches, a peacock spreads its lines across my palm, and the sibilance gives way to kind of more plosive alliteration, just as the kind of life within the drawing seems to emerge. There's a kind of power or a force coming out of that quiet moment. So I'd kind of say sibilance to plosives being that kind of emergence of the life within the drawing. And we get almost a kind of dreamlike quality to the bazaar, that colours leave the street to float up in balloons. I don't know if you've ever been to any bazaars or seen any pictures of them, but they are amazing places of activity and colour, and you can hear things and smell things, and there's so many things appealing to each of your senses that this almost takes on like a kind of dreamlike state. And as she looks round, I've just noticed I didn't mention peacock, national bird of India. So we've got that idea of adopting that national symbol, kind of trying to take on that culture or identification with the culture and the country. So moving on, as she looks round, the dummies, the mannequins in shop fronts tilt and stare with their western perms. Now, I've just put this little kind of thing. I don't know if this has got any legs or not in terms of running that. Don Quixote, literary hero, famous for tilting at windmills. Whenever I hear tilt, I kind of hear that. But it's that kind of strange, quizzical confrontation kind of side of it, if you're going down the Don Quixote line. But the dummies are watching as this is happening. So she's not being observed by anybody else. She's doing the observing as the speaker. But the dummies look at her, maybe with this kind of quizzical confrontation, but stare with their western perms. And you start to get this idea of the juxtaposition of cultures. It puts together the idea of the modern and traditional, the perms, that curling of your hair, the Miss India 1993, those beauty pageants, the modern against the traditional, the Western influence against the Asian tradition, and looking at kind of how the speaker is kind of trying to find her own take and her own identity in amongst all of this swirl of influence. So we have the banners for Miss India 1993 for curtain cloth and sofa cloth, and I'd pick up the consonants on those words and the repetition, the amount of material surrounding her. Again, we have that consonance, canopy me, that sense of enveloping or wrapping or cocooning, almost protecting. If you think of these markets where they have huge swathes of fabric hanging down, and canopy me on a line by itself almost becomes a little bit like a kind of plea, or a kind of the speaker imploring, canopy me in these cloths, as well as this has happened, they embrace me, they kind of surround me. And through this, there's a sense of sort of an element of her personality being generated or born or reborn. I have new brown veins. Thinking about the henna lines acting as something which is life-giving. Remember the idea of veins, blood veins, travelling that life force around your body. And this experience in India has created these new passageways within her, decorating her with the peacock, India's national bird, putting her in the bazaar, allowing her to kind of observe what's going on around her. And the reference to being, the girl being deft, this is a skillful moment that is being shared. And it all seems very, as I said before, very intimate. And she keeps coming back to the idea that this girl who she doesn't know is in such close and intimate and soft contact with her, and actually is marking her literally and metaphorically. And she goes on to talk about, what will happen to the literal mark and what will happen to the metaphorical mark this girl has made. So the influence and the effect is going beyond the henna tattoo. And then we have this line, I am clinging to these firm peacock lines like people who cling to sides of a train. And clinging has those connotations of kind of desperation. And again, it evokes that idea of repeating the memory to try and keep hold of the moment. And this little technical term here, polyleptoton, okay? Polyleptoton is where you have the same root of a word used in different ways. So here it's cling and clinging. You can use it love, lovely, loving, would all be polyleptoton, all based around that root of love. But, the different forms are maybe an attempt to keep hold, trying it in different ways, trying to keep hold of it. Oh, there's a reminder for me to do something on my computer. And you've got that image again, which is one of those associated with different areas of India, of the trains that are travelling long distance, with lots of people kind of hanging on the sides of those trains. And it evokes this metaphor of journey. And where, if you're clinging to the end, to the side of a train and desperately keeping hold of it, where are you travelling? Why are you travelling? The kind of metaphor of grasping onto something to try and take you somewhere else is very much kind of a symbol for what the speaker could be trying to do in this poem. And she looks around again as the kind of experience progresses. There's personification of the furious streets now being hushed, that onomatopoeia, that kind of sibilance in the sh, and that the kind of activity has started to die down a little bit. And she thinks, again, if we have this kind of future shift, I'll scrape off, I will scrape off the dry brown lines before I sleep. Reveal soft as a snail trail the amber bird beneath. And, this is where this experience is going to lead. On one level, literally, after the henna is taken, after it's kind of stained her skin, she'll remove it. The kind of henna colour will remain. And this is kind of a very soft, very delicate, natural image, something that, this is not, I suppose, an intrusion. This is not any sort of violation. This is a compliment of her skin. And that internal rhyme kind of almost makes it a little bit kind of happier or jollier, or snail trail. There's something sort of almost playful about it. But you've got the amber bird beneath. And amber, again, is a colour, that kind of rich orangey brown. But if you take the idea of amber, that is that kind of fossilised resin. So that itself has connotations of something being frozen in time, something being held for a moment. The amber bird, will be revealed beneath. And then that kind of end stop on this line, it will fade within a week. You've got the modal verb will, the assertion, the end stop giving rise to its inevitability. This tattoo is going to go. You can't keep hold of this. But when India appears and reappears, I'll lean across the country with my hands outstretched, longing for the unknown girl in the neon bazaar. So, again, polylepton that appears and reappears. There's that kind of constant presence, that idea of the hennaing has gone deeper than her skin. It's gone into her mind, into her psyche. And the final part of the poem dealing with the future intention, when India appears and reappears, she has no doubt that this is going to be memorable for her. This has changed her in some way. And metaphorically, she will be leaning across the country. And we don't know if, she's going to elsewhere in India because that's where she lives, or whether or not she's going to lean across, countries. But she will reach back psychologically, longing for the unknown girl in the neon bazaar. And that sense of kind of longing for the girl becomes a symbol of everything that India represents to her at that moment. And again, the unknown girl, is she longing for herself in that moment? There's this idea of a collision of cultures, a collision of lives, everything coming together for that connection and realisation of that moment. I mentioned the fact it was free verse earlier, and if you have to do anything regarding context in your exam or in your essay or in any assessment. Bear in mind that Alvi was born in Pakistan. She moved to England when she was very young, when she was a couple of months old with her family. And her poetry kind of deals with those ideas of cultural identity and what it means to be brought up somewhere, what it means to be looking to your heritage somewhere else. It's well worth a kind of little bit of internet research if you have to do the kind of context side of that. I hope this helps. Good luck with whatever you're doing with it. Bye now.